I love when I have a guest where I have a hard time choosing what to focus on. And that's definitely my guest today. As I was making my notes for this episode, I really had a hard time, which is really, really exciting. So without any further ado, because I really want to make the most of this time, my guest today is best known for his book, The Coaching Habit, which is how I found him, which is, I think, the best-selling coaching book of the century. How
I
cool is
know,
that?
amazing.
That there,
You,
it is
I'm
amazing.
more surprised than anybody that that has happened. But yeah, that's what's
Oh,
happened.
brilliant. But hold on, before I dive in, I have to say his full name because he was just teaching me how to do it. His name is Michael Bungay Stanier. Did I get that right?
Stan, almost Stanier.
Almost.
So I always tell the story because when I got married, my wife and I combined our surnames. I used to be just Michael Stanier. She used to be Marcella Bungay. We got
Stanier.
married. We became Michael Bungay Stanier. But I don't think it should be intimidating, but it is slightly intimidating for people. But I once got a letter addressed to Mike Banging Spaniel. And I'm like, compared to Mike Banging Spaniel, pretty much any attempt on my name is going to be better. So you get full marks.
I First of all, that feels really good. Thank you. That's fantastic. I was telling Michael before that, as many of you know, I grew up in Russia, English. I came to the US. I didn't know English. And my biggest goal in life was to speak English like a native, which I think I do. Most people tell me I do. But whenever I mispronounce anything like Michael's name, I just take the refugee exception. I'm like, yep, English is a
Yeah.
second language. Don't know how to
Yeah.
pronounce it. So we're good
Well, I
there.
do the same. I grew up in Australia. And so, English is a bit of a second language for Australians as well. So whenever I get it wrong, I'm like, yeah, but I'm Australian, mate. What can you do?
Ah, there it is. You strengthened it. I was hoping you'd go all the way. Brilliant. A couple other things about Michael that I want you all to know. I'm not going to read his whole bio because we would be here for the whole 45 minutes with me reading his accomplishments. Besides his brilliant book, The Coaching Habit, he has written many others. My favorite is How to Begin. We're going to talk about that since this is a podcast about reinvention, The Advice Trap, and his latest, which I'm almost halfway through, How to Work with Almost Anyone. And I've dog-eared the part that I want to talk about.
Beautiful.
Michael was a Rhodes Scholar. He was recently awarded the Coaching Prize by Thinkers 50, which is like the Oscars of management. But here's what I love about Michael's bio. At the bottom of the bio, it says, balancing out these moments of success, he was banned from his high school graduation for the balloon incident, was sued by one of his law school professors for defamation. I'm really jealous. And his first published piece of writing was a Harlequin romance-esque story involving a misdelivered letter, and it was called The Mail, M-A-L-E, Delivery. Okay, Michael, welcome to Reinventability. And the first question I need to know about the defamation situation, because that I'm a little bit jealous of that.
Yeah, well, so I'm surprisingly old. So this was back in the early '90s when I was in law school in Australia, and I was hopeless at law school. I mean, I was good at literature, which is the other degree I was doing in parallel, but law was just not that interesting for me, and I wasn't that good at it. And this is kind of pre-wokeness, pre all that kind of experience. But we had a teacher who was teaching a point on evidence law, and he was using a factual example of I hope this isn't triggering for anybody, a woman getting raped for as explaining the point of law, and it didn't need to be that story. Could have been any story, but he wanted to keep that. Anyway, a group of us, me at the lead, decided that we would ask him to change that, and that process was what ended up with me getting sued for defamation by this particular professor, which caused a whole hullabaloo at the time because I'd just been awarded the Rhodes Scholarship. So on the one hand, the law school was like, oh, Michael is our golden child. Look how good he is. He's a Rhodes Scholar. And oh no, he's also the troublemaker being sued by one of our law school, one of our professors. So it was a lot of kerfuffle. And basically a year later, he dropped the lawsuit. And for me, it was a very acute awakening to understanding how actually so much of how law works is how power works. It's really a way
Mm,
how people use power and use status and use access to resources to kind of intimidate or silence other people. I really
mm,
felt that in that moment.
mm. Well, you said it was a kerfuffle. I imagine it was extremely stressful and dangerous, and I love what you guys were trying to do. I think that feels like it was the right decision.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
love that you include that in your bio, and it's also because when we have our bios, when I'm going on stage or someone's reading my whole bio, I'm always like, oh my god, she sounds great. But it's always good to like include some reality in there, right?
Well, here's the thing. If you're going on stage, you typically already have status and you already have authority. You're being hired and being asked to come and give a talk or run a workshop or win an award or something. And I find most people's bios are both kind of intimidating and boring at the same time. I mean, they're intimidating because they're like, I look at all the stuff that they've done, and they're boring because I'm like, do I actually care that you won a bronze medal in the 50 meters freestyle race at under 12 age? It's like, not really. And my job, particularly when I'm performing or I'm teaching, is to raise the status and raise the authority of my audience. I want them to feel better about themselves. And one of the best ways to do that is to lower my own status. Now, I have a lot of status. Like I'm straight, old, white man with books and Rhodes scholarships and whatever else. So I've got a lot of status to give away. But part of my job is to give away as much of my status as possible, make people laugh as possible, because that sets them up to more readily be ready and willing to learn from me. And that's going to be the big win in most of these situations.
That's really beautiful, Michael, because what you're talking about there is really creating a moment of connection, right? Where, we're open and connected to each other versus someone's on a pedestal and someone is not on a pedestal and you're
Well, that's
looking
it.
up. I think that's really beautiful.
But I'm going to put it in starker terms. It is me manipulating the room. Like I am deliberately doing a bunch of things to manipulate the experience of other people in the room so I can best be of service to them. So in some ways, I call this the neuroscience of engagement. Like I know there are a bunch of things I can do that make it more likely that the people in the room are actually going to enjoy and learn from whatever it is that I have to teach them. And I will manipulate that whole experience to try and set us both up for success.
I love that. Well, let's talk about that. We're going to get to, I really do want to talk about I want to tell you when I think I became a Rabbit fan. I was a fan, but when I became a Rabbit fan is when I know this is in your book, How to Begin, but I heard you somewhere, I don't know what it was, a podcast, or maybe it was an article, I'm not sure, talk about a worthy goal. And this was
Mm,
a giant belief of mine. So I want to talk about that, but because especially as it relates to reinvention, and kind of
right,
my hard purpose for this podcast is to help people evolve into their fullest expression of their potential, and so it really
right.
aligns. But can you talk about, because I think relationships are such an essential element of our ability to thrive, can you talk about some of your other neuroscience of engagement techniques? Because a
Oh,
lot of
sure.
folks listening, we're all engaging with people all the time, whether it's at
Yeah,
work,
exactly.
on stage, in our lives.
So this will be helpful for anybody who interacts with human beings in their lives. So if you've got, I don't know, a spouse or a partner or kids or a boss or a team or a dry cleaner, all of this is helpful. So 5 times a second at an unconscious level, your brain and my brain and everybody's brain is asking one question: is it safe here or is it dangerous? Safe, dangerous, safe, dangerous, safe, dangerous. Or risk, reward, risk, reward, risk, reward. It's constantly analyzing the environment around it to understand how it can be safer. Because the brain has one goal, and it's to keep you alive as long as possible.
That's right.
Because
That's
the
right.
longer you live, the more likely you are to breed, and the more likely you are to breed, your DNA will carry on, and that's what the brain's all about. It tells you that it's on your side, but really it's just keeping you alive to keep so you can kind of keep your DNA going. So you're constantly scanning, and you are more drawn to the places that feel safer, and you move
Yes.
away from the places that feel more dangerous. And that's just an evolutionary thing, because all of our past ancestors from the last 50,000 years and more, every time they went into a dark cave to get the exciting thing, half of them got eaten by something. Whereas the ones that went, it's an interesting cave, I'm sure there's some good stuff in there, but I'm going to just keep walking. Well, they survived, and we inherit that framing in the world. So there are 4 key drivers that the brain is asking to figure out whether it's safe or dangerous: tribe, expectation, rank, and autonomy. So it spells the word T.E.R.A, T-E-R-A, which is like, it's actually the French word for the landscape, like the terroir of a grape. So tribe, expectation, rank, and autonomy. So tribe, the brain is asking, are you with me or are you against me? So all the things you can do to make people feel with you really help. So as a teacher, I'm doing a few things. One is I'm greeting as many people as possible and often trying to shake their hands, because touch is a sign of authority. Secondly, I'm trying to move things out of the way between me and you. So I'm removing the podium from the stage and often getting down from the stage. I'm trying to make the audience laugh, because when the group laughs, it forms as a tribe, and there's that sense of tribiness. So there's tribe. Expectation is the brain asking, do I know what's about to happen or do I not know? So everything you can help make people see into the future a little bit, so much the better. So when you said to me before we hit record, oh, this podcast will take about 45 minutes and I'll record the intro and the outro after we're done, all of that making me feel safe. Oh, I know what's going to happen. When I just said, when I was teaching you about tribe, and I went, okay, so that's tribe, now expectation. That's a tiny little bit of signaling from me to go, I've finished tribe and I'm moving on to expectation. And your brain goes, oh, okay, good. I feel safe because I know where we are in this storytelling. Rank, the brain goes, are you more important than me or are you less important than me? And if you feel as important or more important than the other person, you feel safer. So everything you can do to raise the status of the other group can be helpful. So that's why I get people to laugh at me. Michael was sued by his professor, banned from high school graduation, wrote a book that's a kind of, a soppy romance short story. I want people to laugh because it lowers my expectation, my rank, and raises their rank. It means that, if I'm working with people, I'll often choose to sit down with them because then we're physically at the same level and people experience that as a raising of their rank. And then finally, the brain is going autonomy, which is like, are you giving me some choices here or am I making all the choices for you? And the more choices you can give people, the better. So, for instance, for the people on this podcast listening now, I could ask you, so we've been talking only 10 minutes or so far, but what's been most useful or most valuable for you already in this podcast, in this conversation? And what I'm doing by asking that question is raising your status, because now I'm pulling you into the conversation, and I'm raising your sense of tribiness, because now you're like, oh, how are we all experiencing it? And I'm raising your sense of autonomy because I'm giving you the choice to pick what is most useful in this podcast conversation so far. So those are just little ways that you can keep using neuroscience to manipulate the experience to help people feel more engaged with you if you're trying to have that.
That's beautiful. I love the framework, Michael, and I'm nodding. My neck is already hurting from nodding so much, because your and my belief system and work have a lot in common. I started to study neuroscience 10 years ago after going through a really severe burnout. It was more than burnout, actually. It was kind of dark night of the soul. Just everything disintegrated in my life. I went from all the greatest success you can ever imagine, other than writing the best coaching book of the century, all the other things. But I went from that to just feeling completely broken. And my father is a scientist. I grew up he's a physicist, but I grew up where, as a math whiz, science was God in our household. And so I went to study neuroscience to understand what was going on in my brain. And to this day, I'm a neuroscience geek and I love understanding how the brain works. So then, as you just talked about, we can use that to create closer relationships to help ourselves thrive. So it's a beautiful framework.
Fantastic.
Before we dive in, and as I said, I want to start by talking to you about goals and worthy goals, because that really aligns with a lot of the work that I do on this podcast and beyond. I want to ask you, this podcast is called Reinventability, right? Which is this cute little kind of concept that I made up because I like to be original. I just like to own that about myself.
Of course.
But it's this idea, in all seriousness, that we all have this capacity to grow. and to grow into our highest potential. And it's something that, like a skill that we can improve. So I want to ask you, what has been one of your perhaps most challenging and meaningful reinventions that you've gone through in your life?
Well, I think the one that I would point to, because I've gone through a few, I would say, but one that was significant was about 5 years ago. I stopped being the CEO at Box of Crayons, which is the training company that I started. So when I first moved to Toronto, didn't have a job, got a job, got fired from that job, and likely got fired on the same week that my green card equivalent, the maple leaf card as they call it in Canada, came through. So I could work for myself for the first time. I was like, fantastic. So I started a company because it was becoming clear that I was basically unemployable. And
Another thing another thing you and I share.
right.
It took me much longer, I think, than you to accept that. But yes, I'm
Yeah.
hardly
Well,
employable other than by myself.
I figured, basically the only boss who could cope with me is probably myself. So, and honestly, for the first number of years, I pretty much did a whole grab bag of anything that might pay the bills. But eventually I figured out that Box of Crayons was about practical coaching skills, and I taught that and built training courses around that. And for 17 years, that meant that I was the founder and the leader of this company called Box of Crayons. But it turned out I just was not a very good CEO. Like, I'm just not that interested in detail. I'm not that interested in making money. I'm not that good at conflict. I'm not that good at push. I'm just like, I fail all the things that you really want a good CEO to have some capacity on. So I hired somebody from within my company, Shannon, and she's now been at Boxer Crayons for 9 years, been the CEO for 5 years, and stepping away from that role was tricky. Not the role so much, although a little bit, because suddenly I was giving somebody else permission to run this company and have it succeed or have it fail on her terms. But that's all I'd done for 17 years, and I was very entangled with I'm the coaching habit guy.
No, it's part of
And
your identity.
part of my identity. And so it's taken quite a while to shed that, take that coat off, and figure out what the next thing for me is. I've made a bunch of things like writing how to begin and how to work with almost anyone. But honestly, it's like 4 years later, 5 years later, that I think I found my next big project. And it's taken all of that time to let go of some stuff, experiment with some stuff, try out some smaller projects, to then going, oh, I think I found my next really big, significant project.
Will you tell us what it is?
Sure. Yeah, it's going to be trying to solve the challenge of how change works in organizations.
So an easy problem, not really anything that complex. Got it.
Well, part of why I wrote The Coaching Habit is I was just irritated with how coaching was taught. I thought it was made mysterious and woo-woo and black box and touchy-feely, all sorts of stuff that I'm like, that stops it being accessible to people. And what I realized is in some ways I've been a change consultant for 30 some years. And the field hasn't shifted that much from when I started 30 years ago. It's dominated by big consultancies. There's a lot of people shouting. There's a lot of noise in this space. And I'd like to cut through that and try and simplify it and curate the very best stuff for people who lead change in organizations. So that's what that new project's going to be about.
I'm excited. I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, me too.
And excited to follow your adventure. But one more question I want to ask you about your reinvention, because what you mentioned, kind of letting go of part of your identity to open up to others. I find in myself, my many reinventions, and with people that I work with leaders, entrepreneurs, that's often the hardest thing. Often the hardest thing is not the tactical steps that we have to take to make a change or do something new or stop doing something. It's that the story that we believe about ourselves becomes almost like an iceberg. We start to think this is who I am. So like for me, when I burnt out, I was running a tech company. That was my background. And one of the first, you're looking, so you're looking at my art behind me. I started to paint,
Yeah.
something I'd always wanted to do, never let myself, because it had nothing to do with the story of,
Right.
I'm a provider for my family. I'm a business CEO. And just doing that was a giant act because I had to get rid of this like iceberg. So can you talk about that? Because I think that
Yeah.
is a big challenge for a lot of people.
Well, I think it's tricky and it's complex because first of all, you've got your resume, your CV, and you're like, this is who I am. This is the skills I've accumulated. This is the last role I was in, and it can be hard to imagine much more than just the next obvious role. And I liken it to when you leave a job or when you're in this process of reinventing yourself, you need to hike out of the valley of where you are now to see the wider landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a while to hike out of that valley because all you've got is the landscape you've got to know over the last number of years. And you can't just teleport your way to a new place. Yeah, it's like it's a journey. You have to walk out. You have to walk up the hill, and you get over the top of the hill, and then suddenly you see a new landscape beneath you. And sometimes even that's not enough. Like if I'm continuing to stretch this metaphor, like I feel like I've had to walk out of the valley of boxer crayons, walk across the plain of L&D and coaching, get on a boat, sail across the sea, and land at a new land called Change Signal, which is the name of this new project. Um, so there is a degree of wrestling with one of the hardest questions, which is if I'm going to say yes to this, what must I say no to?
Yes.
And part of the challenge of that is we mostly underestimate just how strong the gravity of the status quo is.
Mm.
So we can have all sorts of strong opinions about it. It's time to change, it's time to leave, it's time to do something different. But without a certain amount of clarity, a certain amount of courage, a certain amount of community, a certain amount of luck, we often find ourselves pulled back to the more familiar because it's just hard to sometimes imagine beyond that.
Yeah, and I love the analogy of the valley because it speaks to me, one of the core. I have a huge bias for action, and I think we can overthink every decision. I'm
True.
someone who I just by my nature I leap before I think,
Yeah.
which has definitely landed me in some valleys I didn't want to be part of. But
Right.
just in your analogy, we can't climb out of a valley unless we actually start to walk, right?
Yeah.
To try and think ourselves into the new thing doesn't work. I just want to share this with you as you were talking about how easy it is, like the gravity is strong. So my father is a physicist. And so one of the concepts that I really love as an analogy is the idea of escaping gravity.
Mm,
Right. So it's called escape velocity. So when a
that's
rocket
right.
goes into space, you may know this, the most energy that it uses is initially to escape the pull of the Earth's gravity. Once it actually gets into orbit, it still needs to be using energy, but it's a fraction.
Yeah.
And so when we see a rocket and it's got all that and the red and the fire, that's because the amount of energy to escape velocity, to reach escape velocity is tremendous. And so I think of it that way, that all of what you just said, community, connection, curiosity, courage, exploration, experimentation, that's us gathering the fuel that
Yes.
then allows us to reach that escape velocity.
Yeah. And you have to burn that engine for a while as well. That's part
That's
of
right.
it, which is like it takes. I don't know exactly how long it takes for a rocket ship to escape gravity from the planet, but it's like a 5 minute burn or a ten
That's
minute
right.
burn or something like that. And I mean, people are getting the metaphor, which is like you got to keep the engine burning for a while to finally pull away from the gravity.
Yeah. Well, this is actually a great segue because what I really, really want to talk to you about is your idea of having a worthy goal. As I said, when I
Yeah,
came across it first, it really connected to me because I'll
great.
share with you one of my observations or maybe biases or one of my lenses is that I find that often really wonderful, highly capable humans choose really small goals for themselves.
Mm,
And it's something that I actually have dedicated a lot of my mentorship work to is I always tell people, get ready because we're about to set goals that are beyond where you are. So this idea, this concept of a worthy goal, can you talk about that? Because it
Sure.
also is connected in your own journey to your new project, right? So can
That's
you
it.
talk about that?
Yeah.
What is that? What's a worthy goal?
So you're right. We're talking now about the How to Begin book, and this is all about how you do something that matters in the world. And the worthy goal, the concept of it is that to set a goal, you need to have three different elements to it. It needs to be thrilling and important and daunting. Now, thrilling is the place to start because it means, does it actually light you up? Do you actually care? Does this actually make you rub your hands together and go, oh, that sounds like it would be fun? And you want to start there because actually so often we we in a sneaky way kind of inherit goals from other people, other people's expectations, other people's hopes, our cultural expectations, our parental expectations. There's all sorts of ways that we can end up going on, this should be my goal. So this is a trickier question than it sounds, which is, what is thrilling for you? What actually would get you
Mm.
pretty excited? Really helpful for people like you and me who are, if you think of the Colby index, self-awareness measurement thing, quick start people, that's me, probably you as well, which is like, oh, bias to action. We're like, oh, I didn't even think about it. I just plunged into it because it was shiny and interesting in that moment. But this forces you to stop and think, which is like, do I care about this enough? Really? Because life is short. The second element is important. Meaning, does it give more to the world than it takes? So I've got a particular bias in the book, which is like, I want people to be working on stuff that makes the planet better. So how do I do that? And we're just having a slight video tech issue, but I think that might solve it. If you're watching the video, I'm coming back, I promise.
It's the
There we go.
mystery. There you
There
are.
we
All
go.
good.
So important is about making the world a better place. Does it give more to the world than it takes? Because quite often we'll set goals and they're like, oh, that's good for me. And that's fine. Like if you want to set goals for yourself and it's just about yourself, fill your boots. But for the work I'm doing, I'm like, I want it to be a better world as well. And I want you to understand the connection. In part because I want you to have internal motivation and extrinsic motivation to help you get this done. Because the very essence of setting your goal involves the third element, which is daunting, which is, does this take you to the edge of who you are and what you know and what you've done? Will this force you to learn? Will this force you to kind of reinvent yourself? There's a line in the book. It's kind of the core line in that book, which is, we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things.
Yes. One of my
So,
favorite things that you say, Michael.
oh, thank you. So this is the daunting is this a hard thing? Is this going to stretch you and grow you? Um, And the process I suggest in the book is just to realize that whatever you first think your worthy goal is, that's probably a perfect first draft, but it's not the final draft. So one of the exercises in the book is, once you've written out your worthy goal and you've taken your best guess at what you think it might be, now give yourself an honest score out of 7 for each one of the three elements. Out of 7, how thrilling is this for you? Really? I mean, this is not for anybody else. You're not trying to make this shiny for anybody else. This is just for you. How thrilling is it for you out of 7? How important is it for you out of 7? How daunting is it for you out of 7? And then when you add those scores up, you'll get a score of something out of 21. I often say you're only allowed to have 2 sevens. You can't have 3. So maximum 20 out of 21, minimum, let's say 3 out of 21. Part of what you then do is you go, how do I rewrite this to increase my score? Because I reckon you're aiming for 18 or close to it as a way of going, it's got the right balance of thrilling, important, and daunting to keep me working on this. And it's a useful test. But actually, the key lesson here is, if you're taking on a worthy goal, it takes a bit of work to figure it out and to find it. And when you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, or I wrote it down and I got less excited about it, I'm like, that's fine. That's just the process. That's great. Don't give up. Just know that you're at the start of the particular journey.
And I love that framework and find it, like I said, my head's starting to hurt from nodding in full agreement. Um, One of the concepts, and this is actually in your most recent book, which is How to Work with Anyone, that I dog-eared that I think relates to this, is where you draw the distinction between, and this is in a keystone conversation, which you can tell us what that is.
Yep.
You draw this really powerful distinction between being good at something and being fulfilled by something. And the quote,
Right.
just to read for our audience, the curse of competence traps you doing what you're good at, but not fulfilled by, which I
Right.
think is just truth with a capital T, and something that I did for 20 years. I was
Right.
in tech, starting tech companies, working at tech companies because I was very good at it. It was not fulfilling for me. But I'd love for you to connect this, because I think this also connects to goals.
Yeah.
One thing that I find, and I definitely did this, like I'm raising my hand also, especially with highly capable people, if they can do something, they do it.
Right.
Right. So it's like, hey, I'll set this goal because it's hard and it's, it's definitely daunting and, oh, it's exciting just because it's something, difficult. And so can you talk about this? Because I think that's what it comes down to. Is
Yeah.
this fulfilling, or is
That's
it
it.
just something you're good at?
So the quick context for the How to Begin book is the core idea is that our working relationships have a really big impact on our success and our happiness. And most of us don't do very much about that. We just cross our fingers and we hope
Yeah,
for the
sorry. You mean
best.
how to work with almost
Oh,
anyone?
sorry. Yeah, how to
Yeah,
work
well,
with almost anyone. Yeah.
I'm taking you across. Well, this is what happens, Michael, when you write a lot of great books. This is the
Thank you.
problem. You
All
can't keep
right.
track.
How to work with almost anyone. Our
Yes.
working relationships drive our happiness and
Really
success.
fantastic book.
Stop leaving it to chance, do something about it. And the key tactic is a keystone conversation, which is simply and not easily a conversation about how we work together before you plunge into the work itself. And most of the time we just get on with the work and hope it solves itself, and it doesn't. And the keystone conversation is 5 questions to ask and to answer so that you figure out each other. Oh, that's who you are at your best. That's what you're like, not at your best. Here's what I'm like at my best. And then you figure out the best way to work together. So you bring out each other's best, you avoid each other's worst, you know how to repair it when things go wrong, and you then get to do the best work you can together. And in the first question is, what's your best? So tell me when you shine and tell me when you flow. And each of the 5 questions in the book has 3 exercises to help you get your answers kind of tight and gritty and useful. And there's an exercise in the book for that first question around what are you good at and what are you fulfilled by? And this often gets collapsed in on each other. We kind of think they're the same. Particularly, as you said, if you're a kind of highly competent person and you're ambitious and you're a good kid, like you probably got A's at school, you're like, oh, I've got to do all my homework. So you feel like you got to do it all. And the suggested exercise in the book is draw a classic consultant 2x2 box. So if you don't know what that is, it's a square, and then there's a cross in the middle of it. So you've got 4 boxes. And along the horizontal axis is good at, plus minus. Vertical axis is fulfilled by, plus minus. And then write down the things that you do and assign them to the various boxes. You've got 4 boxes. One of those boxes is I am good at this and I am fulfilled by this. So if the more you have there, the happier you are right now. You might be really fulfilled and good at being a podcast host. So you're like, I love being a podcast host. This is great. I get great guests. I ask good questions, and it lights me up because I talk to cool people. So that's fantastic. There's a box which says I'm not good at this and I am not fulfilled by this. Hopefully you have nothing in that box, because it's a disaster if you have anything in that box, because it means you suck at it and it sucks you dry and you're still somehow doing it. So it's like, stop it or give it to somebody else, or it shouldn't be on your mix. And then the 2 interesting ones are I am good at this but not fulfilled by this, which is so seductive if you're this kind of like high performing, ambitious, good kid, because you go, look, I'm not fulfilled by it, but I'm good at it, so I should probably be doing it.
That's right.
And you've got to figure out how to negotiate away from that. How do you give it to somebody else? How do you give it to Chat GPT or your AI agent of choice? How do you lower your standards so you can do it more quickly? How do you make it more efficient? But you want to be reducing as much as possible in that corner, because it seduced you just because you're good at it. And you know what? You don't need that trophy anymore. You've already won that trophy. You can go and find other trophies if you need trophies. And the final combination is, I am not yet good at it. And that yet is a good word. I'm not
Yes.
yet good at it, but I am fulfilled by it. And that turns out to be your learning edge. That's where you're going to grow into. You don't want to do that work unsupervised. You need to have a coach or a mentor or a safety net, but you need to step into the process of being consciously incompetent for a while. There's this learning ladder. Unconsciously incompetent, you don't know that you're dumb. Consciously incompetent, you realize that you're pretty bad at this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Consciously competent, oh, I'm getting the hang of it. I still have to think my way through it. And then unconsciously competent, I've got it. It's a habit. It's in my bones now. And when you get to this midlife moment where you're reinventing yourself, part of the pull of the status quo is most of us like to feel competent.
Yes.
Part of the freedom, but the hardness of reinventing yourself is you need to feel incompetent for some stuff for a while, because that's what it means to reinvent yourself. You put away mastery and you accept being an apprentice. And most of us, particularly if we've got status, like I'm a middle-aged, fairly competent person. It's hard for us to do that. That's part of the strings of status quo that keep you pinned to the ground.
That's right. The trappings of success. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's right on. And I do like, that's why I asked you about it. It's connected to the worthy goals, because to me, when a lot of people feel, I'm sure you've experienced this, I'm observing it more and more now, this like tug inside, right? Like everything is okay-ish. My life is
yeah,
fine-ish. I'm doing well-ish, but like there's something pulling. And I always think of that something pulling as like other dimensions of you that are looking to come out,
nice,
but that likely the fulfillment, but it's very easy to ignore that, to say, wait, hold on. But that means like when I started to paint, I had no idea. I'd never
right,
done it. What if I suck? What will people think of a tech CEO starting painting? Or when I wrote my first book, Michael, it was about happiness.
right,
I come from a Russian Jewish household. Happiness was not a word that
right.
I knew how to pronounce in Russian, right? Suffering is the way.
Exactly. I've read Dostoevsky. That's
There
not
you
it. No,
go,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I grew up with that in my blood. And so all of a sudden I was teaching happiness and fulfillment, right? So that required having that, I didn't have the formulation, worthy goal, because I think that's part of the fuel that helps us to escape that
Right.
trap of good enough, right? Can I ask you, related to this? I'm sure, well, I wonder if how you do it, but there's always fear connected to this, right? Whenever
Yeah,
we are to step into something new, a new dimension of ourselves, a new job, we have fear. You talked about the brain's
yeah,
fear,
yeah.
right? We just want to feel safe.
Yep.
So can you talk about that when someone really feels overcome with doubt? And then, because again, the gravity is pulling, oh, I'll just stay where I am. Can you talk about how we might work through
Yeah.
that?
It's useful to go, what are you actually afraid of? And part of what I think about is asking a different question, although related, which is, what's at risk here? What's
Mhm.
at risk? And there's probably like three things broadly at risk. There's your bodily autonomy. There is time. Four things at risk. So bodily autonomy. There's the time you're investing in it. There's the money that you're risking, either through opportunity cost or through the expense of the thing. And then there's your reputation. So four key drivers. Now, broadly speaking, you should avoid stuff that's going to kill you.
I think that's a fantastic
Yeah,
idea. I stand
exactly.
behind that. Yes.
That's why I get the big bucks for key insights just like that. Um, and then with time, money, and reputation, if you've gone, look, I've sat with this and this is the best guess on how to spend my time, then the time is just the time. It's going to pass anyway, so you've taken your best guess around it. Money, you need to figure out how much you can afford to spend, how much you can afford to lose, how much you can afford to not earn so you can do this other thing instead. So that's useful to understand what's at risk around that. And the thing that often pulls people in is around the reputation. I'm fearful about the loss of reputation. And there's a great quote. Um, I'll get it slightly wrong, and I don't know who it's from, but it's like, I used to worry what people thought of me until I realized nobody thought of me.
That's right.
And, the anxiety most of us have around reputation is outsized because actually just nobody actually cares that much because everybody's thinking about their own stuff. So I I have moments of doubt and anxiety around what am I doing and why am I doing this and are there other things I can be doing? Um, but when I go, look, what's at risk here? Then it gets easier because then I go, look, actually, what's at risk is my reputation, and like I've got a good enough reputation for the people I care about, so a failure is not actually going to damage it that much. And the people who I don't care about, I don't care about. And so getting more specific about the fear,
Mhm.
getting more specific about what's truly at risk can be really helpful.
No, and I think back to our mutual love of neuroscience, when we ask that question, what's at risk? It's an analytical question. So we get
Right.
out of our fear amygdala and ask that. I don't know if
Nice.
you know the story. I think, Michael, you'll appreciate it. Back to No One's Thinking of You. The story goes that Einstein, before he was Einstein, as we know him, wrote a paper and showed up to deliver it at some scientific conference, and he was wearing flip flops. And, nobody else was wearing flip flops. That's not what you wear. And apparently he was asked, like, why are you wearing flip flops? And he said, well, because either what I have written and discovered is incredible and I'm a genius and no one's going to care that I'm wearing flip flops, or it's completely stupid and then really no one's going to care that I'm wearing flip flops. And I
Right.
often think about that because that really
I
speaks
love that.
to,
I haven't heard that story, but it's a great one.
yeah. All right, Michael, I could talk to you for hours. I really love your insights.
Thank
One
you.
closing question. Um, if you think about, one of the concepts that has been really powerful for me and in my work is this idea that we are not the product of our past, that actually we're motivated by our future, by what
Right.
we want to become. Um, and I'd love for you to just share your insights on how we can, you have this phrase, I think it's in your book or I picked it up somewhere that, reclaiming our ambition. I
Yeah.
feel like ambition's become a dirty word.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have burnt out, including myself from actually, I used to think it's because I was too ambitious. And now I realize it's because I was so disconnected from what was fulfilling for
Right.
me, to use your words. So I'd love just in closing for you to share insights of how we can reclaim our ambition, what you mean by that, how we can extend and expand
Mm.
our horizons for the future we want for ourselves and by extension the world that we all live in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that in some ways, I'm trying to reclaim ambition away from, the kind of the grubby sort of ambition, which is like, I want to be king of the world, I want to be boss of the bosses, I want to be rich, I want to drive a car, whatever. All that kind of sort of like, I want the status that comes with that, and I want the wealth or whatever, and the power that comes with that. For me, being ambitious is like, how do you unlock your greatness? I mean, it kind of comes back to some of the things we've talked about, which is we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. What are the hard things? The hard things are something that is thrilling and important and daunting for you. There's this concept that anybody who's into reinvention, which is everybody here, will have come across most certainly, which is this idea of climbing the second mountain. It's like,
Yeah.
what is the second mountain? It's like after I've climbed my first mountain and I've got the first phase of my life, which in career, which is like, a certain level and a certain money and a certain authority. Most people kind of, 50-ish plus or minus a bit go, well, is that enough? Am I done? What do I want now? And this idea of climbing a second mountain, which is a sense of what am I doing more as an elder, more as a mentor, more as a gift, more as a legacy. And that's what I want people to be ambitious for, is like figure out what their second mountain is. Um, and even as I say that, I'm sometimes asked what I hope my legacy will be.
Mm.
And I'm like, I don't really have any hopes for that because I can't do much about it. I'm either going to have some people remember my work for a little bit or not. Pretty sure that in 100 years' time, I will be forgotten by everybody, as will everything I've ever created.
Mm.
And I'm kind of fine with that. That's the way history rolls. Um, so my job is to find the stuff in this moment, which is my best guess at how to spend my one wild and precious life. And that's the ambition that I want. It's like, how we, this is Mary Oliver. How will you spend your one wild and precious life?
Yeah, what a beautiful reminder. And one way that I think about it, just to share with you, I had an opportunity to study with Jean Houston. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's someone who should be much more well known
Right.
than she is. She's a mythologist and philosopher. She was a student of Joseph Campbell, and I remember she would ask me literally every week on our calls, whatever we were talking about, it didn't matter. She always asked me, Natalie, how are you part of a bigger story of the world?
Nice.
And I think that's really what, to me, ambition means, is connected to what you're saying, is that it isn't just what I want. Is I think it's actually incredibly hopeful and invigorating to think about, how is me, not just Natalie, but I as an individual listening to this, how am I part of something bigger, and how can I contribute to that? And so
That's
a hat
great.
tip to Jean for instilling that in me, where I ask myself that question every day for whatever I'm doing. That's a question. It's very grounding.
That's a great
Um,
question.
Michael, thank you so much for your insights, for you are an artist at that. So as an artist, I look for the artist in others. And one of your art, uh, one of your artistic abilities, you probably know this, but I see it as your art, is to make things really accessible without diminishing their depth.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing yourselves. And to our listeners, as always, incredibly grateful for you making the time, opening up some of your heart and your mind to us. That's all we have for today's episode. I will see you, if you're watching on YouTube, and be in your ear, as I like to say, on our next episode next week. Take good care.